Hi, this is Lance with SinfulKittyBoudoir.com, and today we're going to do a black and white conversion. The first thing we're going to do here is bring up an adjustment layer to desaturate this image using the black and white adjustment layer. I'm not going to mess around with the red, yellow, green, cyan, magenta, and blue filters up here. I'm just going to leave the default settings because really all I'm worried about is dropping out all of the color and just leaving it as a black and white grayscale image. Next, I'm going to focus on the eyes. I bring up a curves adjustment layer, and I'm really not concerned about the rest of the image. I just want to see the effect on the eyes. So I'm going to increase the midtones while dropping down the shadows, making the shadows a little bit darker. And when I think I've gotten that to where I like it, then I'm going to invert the layer mask because I really don't want this layer to affect the rest of the image. So I've inverted the mask, Command I or Control I in Windows. And now, since I want to just show the effect for the eyes, I'm going to use the paintbrush on this layer mask. So since the layer mask is black, I'm going to make sure white is my current color. And I'm just going to color in the areas where I want to affect this curve. And I'm going to have my flow rate at about 10%. So I'm just going to color in here on the whites of the eyes, as well as this dark mascara and eyeliner. And I think that looks good there. That's really the only thing I'm concerned about for this layer. Okay, and I think that looks good. So now I want to affect the tonality of the image because I like a more contrasty look to my images. So I'm going to bring up another curves layer, but just so I don't get confused, I'm going to name this layer Eyes so I can refer back to it later if I need to. Now to affect the tonality, I'm going to add another curves layer. And this is where I'm concerned about the rest of the image. So this is going to be another S-shaped curve, and I really just want to see the effect on the overall image. So I don't really have any kind of specific formula for this. I just kind of mess around with it until it has the look that I am happy with. And I think that about does it. I don't want to lose the skin tones, the bright areas of the skin tones by making the midtones too high. So I just kind of play around with it until I make sure that I get some of that texture back. So that's about where I want it as far as the curves go for the overall image. And so I'm going to name this layer Tonality. If I can type. There we go. And now that we've affected the tonality, as I said, I really like the contrasty look to this type of black and white image. So in order to do that, once I've done this curve layer, I like to do an overlay blend mode for another layer. And this is one of my favorite tools in Photoshop. And if you don't already know how to do this, definitely remember this. It's called Stamp Visible, and basically what it does is it flattens all of the layers underneath it, all of the visible layers underneath it, into a separate layer for you without actually flattening the entire image. So to do that, you do Shift, Option, Command E, and as you can see up here, it has created a new layer for me consisting of all of the layers underneath. So I'm going to name this layer Overlay because, as I said, I just want this to give me a little bit more contrasty look. So I'm going to change the blend mode to Overlay, just like the name of the layer, and that's pretty dramatic there, so I don't want that much. So I'm going to scale this back until I get some of the detail back in here. And for those areas where it's really dark, I'm going to add a layer mask so I can go in and bring in some of that detail that I lost in the shadows. So the layer mask is white, so I'm going to change the active color to black. I'm going to change the flow rate to about 45%, and I'm just going to go in and color in that color down here in the shadows so we can get back some of that detail. It's very subtle, but it's enough that it brings back the detail that I want. I'm going to get this area here. And if you feel like you're losing this area in the background, you can also color in there just to get some of the texture from the walls. And really, I just go along all of the areas where it's really, really dark. Don't want to lose the eyes. Okay, so that's the overlay layer, and that gives me that contrasty look. See the difference? And so now that I've done that, I'm going to create a new layer that I'm going to call highlights and shadows, and you'll see why here in just a second. So let's rename that layer. And we're going to change the blend mode to soft light, and we're going to bring the opacity down to about 50, and I'll explain why. Now that we've done that, we're going to color in the areas of the image with shadows and highlights artificially, because the lighting didn't necessarily create it, so I want to add that to give depth to my client's face or my model's face. So you use black for shadows and white for highlights. It's very simple. And all you do is color in. So I'm going to change my flow rate back to about 9 or 10%. And I'm just going to color in, because black is my current color, I'm just going to color in the areas where I want to create a little bit more shadow. And I like to emphasize the cheekbones, so I'm going to add a little bit more shadow, or exaggerate the shadow under the cheekbones, and add a little bit of depth here to the bridge of the nose, as well as above and around the upper part of the eye. There, I like that. And this is really just to your preference. Some people like a little bit more subtle look, others like a little bit more dramatic look. So, and the beauty of this is, because it's a separate layer, you can scale that according to your preference. Once you've painted it in, you can increase it or decrease it based on how much effect you want to achieve. So I think 30 will work about here. Now, one other thing you might notice is that there are bags under this model's eyes. So I'm going to switch colors to highlights, which is white, and I'm just going to paint in these areas here where I saw a little bit of darkness. And we'll do the same for the other eye. And extend the cheek just a tad. And I'm going to add, lastly, just a little bit of shadow or darkness up on the forehead. Okay, and just to see the difference here, I'm going to turn this layer off and on. So you can see how that affects the image once you've added some shadow and highlight to it. And again, it's to your preference, whatever you feel works. All right, so now that we're done with highlights and shadows, now we're going to affect the black and white aspect of this. There's a little bit of a tint that you can add, which is called colorization, and you can give it a nice patina look, or you can make it more sepia, or you can make it more of a bluish color, kind of like the perfume ads you might see in magazines. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. We'll go in, add a hue and saturation layer. I'm going to tick this box, colorize, and I'm going to bring the saturation down quite a bit because we want to retain that black and white aspect, but we also want to get that slight tint to it. So you can see here, this is that patina I was talking about, and you can make it a little bit more saturated if you want, or you can bring it back the way I like it, where it's very, very subtle. That blue I was talking about, if I were to add that, it would be moving this hue slider to under the blue. But again, I really just kind of prefer that patina look. And that's it for the colorization. So once we've done that, now we're ready for the sharpening and contrast if you choose to do more contrast. So in this case, I'm just going to do another stamp visible. So Shift, Option, Command E. That flattens everything underneath. So let me show you what that looks like. You can see here, if I hide all of the other layers underneath, it doesn't change the image one bit. But if I hide the stamp visible layer, our original image is underneath. So that's just to show you that it flattens all of the layers underneath into one separate layer. Now that I've done that, I'm going to sharpen this layer. So we'll go to Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and the default settings are still in here from the last time I used this, which was 50% with a radius of 4 pixels. So I like that. I'm going to leave that. Select OK. And if you feel that that's a little bit too strong of a sharpening for you, then you can scale it back. Again, the beauty of this technique is that everything is scalable. So you can scale that back to about 65%. You can see the difference here. Let me zoom in. So you can see that there's a very slight difference. Now if I bump that up to 100%, it's even more exaggerated. Okay, but I'm going to bring that back down to about 60, let's say 60. And that's it. That's the entire technique. And it's based on whatever is appropriate for your image, and you can scale it on each of these different layers. You can scale the effect for each of them and make it where it's where you feel it's optimized for that particular image. So hopefully this helps you and gives you another tool to add to your toolkit. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.